She's just soft-spoken, and you just feel the kindness.
I was riding back with a murderer and didn't know it.
It was a 3-word email, dig 'em up.
For 6 years, a warning went unheeded. Wild Horse Saloon, Green River, Wyoming. A young woman pulls someone aside in the bathroom. She's 22, married, scared. She says her husband is going to kill her. The person she tells doesn't believe her. August 1996. That same young woman and her 5-year-old son fall to their deaths from a cliff on Lost Dog Trail. The investigation rules it an accident. The case closes. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when greed demands more. 2 years later, wiretaps capture a plot to murder someone's own parents for insurance money. The conspiracy conviction forces investigators to reopen the 1996 deaths. The geography proves impossible. The story doesn't hold. An exhumation yields no answers. Then a witness no one expected walks into a courtroom and remembers a trail someone swore they'd never seen. 6 years after the bathroom warning, a jury finally believes her. But by then, she'd been dead for 2,190 days. To understand how it came to this, we need to go back to the beginning. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we continue, I'd love for you to drop a quick comment. What's the weather like where you are right now? I truly appreciate your presence here. This story includes some dramatized elements for storytelling and reflection. The heart of the story, the facts and the lesson it carries, is what truly matters. The woman pushed open the bathroom door at the Wild Horse Saloon and found Leanna Duke bent over the sink, crying. Leanna was 22 years old, soft-spoken, the kind of person people in Green River, Wyoming described as genuinely kind. That night she was scared. Music bled through the door from the bar. The woman who'd walked in was a stranger. She asked if Leanna was okay. Leanna wiped her face with a paper towel that smelled like cheap soap. A friend had called to say Bob was at the bar with another woman. So she came. She found him. And now she was here, telling a stranger what she couldn't tell anyone else. My marriage is terrible, Leanna said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. He wants out. He told me he'd kill me. The woman said the worst possible thing. Well, we've all been there. Leanna wiped her face one more time. She didn't argue. She didn't try again. She walked out of that bathroom and back into the noise. And the woman forgot about it before the night was over. 2 years later. And it happened exactly as Leanna said. No one in that bar remembered this night, but it happened. Leanna Davidson Duke tried to warn someone. She tried, and no one believed her. Bob Duke married Leanna Davidson on May 25, 1991, the same day he graduated high school. She was 17 and pregnant. He dreamed of college, of leaving Green River and becoming something other than a carpet installer in a mining town. He told friends the marriage ruined his life. Don't get married, he said more than once. It'll ruin your life. Roger had been Bob's friend since high school. Everyone in Green River knew Roger as the troublemaker, the kid with a goatee in 8th grade. Bob Duke was the teacher's son who didn't smoke or drink. The whole town knew who the good kid was. Bob and Roger watched hitman movies together. They joked about taking people out, making it look like an accident. Just jokes, Bob would say later. Leanna was fiercely protective of Eric Duke. Their 5-year-old son, she never took her eyes off him, kept him within arm's reach at playgrounds. People noticed. Some thought she was too protective. Remember that detail. 6 years from now, it would matter. On the morning of August 10th, 1996, the Duke family loaded their car for a picnic. The day was bright Wyoming summer blue sky, the Wind River Range rising sharp to the east. There were toys in the back seat, something for a 5-year-old to play with. Bob Duke was 23. Leanna was 22. Eric was 5. They left Green River driving toward Lost Dog Trail, where the cliffs climb steep and the drop is unforgiving. Less than an hour later, 2 of the 3 people in that car would be dead at the bottom of a cliff, and the third would be telling a story that didn't add up. The rescue team found the path down in minutes. Lost Dog Trail cuts into the Wind River Range east of Green River, where the cliffs rise steep and the drop is 180 feet. The rescue team descended with ropes, calling to each other over the wind. They reached the bottom and found Leanna Davidson Duke, 22 years old, and Eric Duke, 5, both dead. Bob Duke stood at the top and told investigators what happened. Eric had been chasing lizards near the edge. He'd turned his back to get something from the Jeep. In that moment, the ground gave way. He heard a scream. When he looked back, they were gone. He said he'd never driven down Lost Dog Trail before. Didn't know the place was dangerous. He said he stood at the edge and could hear Eric gurgling blood from 180 feet below, but he couldn't find the path down. So he drove back to Green River for help. Keep that detail in mind. The rescue team found the trail to the bottom in minutes. It wasn't hidden. It was steep, yes, but it was there. A man desperate to reach his dying son would have found it. Bob Clevenger was one of the first responders that afternoon. He drove Bob home afterward. The drive was silent except for one attempt at conversation. I tried to make small talk with him, Clevenger recalled. I did not want to say anything that would upset him. All I said when we got there was, "Your son needs you now." It was a detail no one caught at the time, how a man could hear his son's breathing from that distance on a windy cliff, but not find the path a rescue team located in minutes. How a father could stand at the top, listening, and choose to drive away. The questions didn't come until later. At the time, there were no questions. There was only tragedy. And tragedy in a small town gets handled quietly. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department took Bob's statement and closed the file within days. Accidental death. A terrible fall. No search warrants were requested. No interviews were conducted with friends or neighbors. No forensic autopsy was ordered. The case was closed before anyone thought to ask why Bob had driven to a remote cliff he claimed never to have seen before, or how the ground could give way beneath both of them at the exact same moment, or why a protective mother who never let her son out of her sight would have let him chase lizards at the edge of a 180-foot drop. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department closed the case as accidental death. No search warrants, no interviews, no forensic autopsy. Just one person in Green River said what everyone else was thinking, and he was told to stay quiet. Bob Duke stood at his wife and son's funeral and showed nothing. No tears, no trembling, no collapse or moment of weakness. Friends and family who'd come to mourn Leanna and Eric watched him and whispered to each other in the kind of low voices people use when they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't fit. "Do you think he even realizes that they're gone?" one mourner asked. The answer came back quick and certain. He's not even in touch with reality. In a small town where everyone knows everyone, people find kind names for things they don't want to call by their real name. Shock. Denial. Grief so deep it looks like nothing at all. Green River called it all of those things and let Bob Duke stand there in silence while they buried his family. 1 month later, someone drove past the gas station on the edge of town and saw Bob Duke with a new girlfriend. Both of them were smiling. Both of them looked happy. "It just struck me as being odd," the witness would say later. Odd. Another kind name. In 1994, 2 years before Leanna and Eric died, Bob Duke and Roger approached 2 underage sisters outside a mini-mart in Green River. They offered alcohol. They offered their company. The younger sister was 13 years old. The older one wasn't much older. What happened next stayed quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that small towns know how to keep when the people involved are young and the adults don't want to make it worse by talking about it. But it happened, and the detail that mattered most wouldn't surface for 8 more years. Remember this detail. 8 years from now, it would matter. Only one person in Green River said what everyone else was thinking. He was a police officer who'd known these cliffs his whole life, who'd grown up in Wyoming, where the Wind River Range rises steep and unforgiving. And every local kid learns which trails are safe and which ones aren't. He looked at the story Bob Duke told investigators, the ground giving way, the fall, the claim he'd never been to Lost Dog Trail before, and he knew it didn't add up. So he drove out to see for himself. Lost Dog Trail is steep on 3 sides. The drop is 180 feet. The path to the bottom is narrow, but it's there. Clear as day if you know where to look. A man who grew up in Green River would know where to look. A man desperate to reach his dying son would have found it. The officer stood at the edge and knew immediately it was no accident. But the case didn't belong to him. It belonged to the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department, and they'd already closed the file. Accidental death. Tragic fall. Nothing to investigate. He spoke his piece to his superiors, and then he was told to move on. The investigation, if you could call it that, was over. In a town of 11,000 people, there's always one person who won't find a kind name for what they see. But that doesn't mean anyone listens. Lieutenant Mont Meekum stood at the edge of Lost Dog Trail and looked down. The drop was 180 feet. Steep on 3 sides. The cliff face fell away sharp and unforgiving. The kind of place where Wyoming geology doesn't give you second chances. Wind rushed up from the gorge below, carrying the sound of nothing, just emptiness and the long silence of desert stretching toward Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Mont had driven out here alone a few days after the deaths. He'd grown up in Green River, knew these cliffs the way locals do, which trails were safe for families and which ones weren't. Lost Dog Trail was at the end of a dirt road that led to nowhere. No picnic tables, no marked viewpoints, just rock and void and a drop that would kill you if you fell. What stopped him wasn't the height. It was the shape of this place. You don't take your small child and your wife and go have a picnic on a rock ledge on 3 sides, Mont would say later. Bob Duke said he'd never been here before. But this wasn't a place you stumbled into. The path down to the bottom was steep, but it was there narrow, switchbacking along the cliff face, the kind of trail rescue workers found in minutes. Bob Duke claimed he'd stood at the top and heard his son gurgling blood from 180 feet below, but couldn't find the way down. Mont stood at that same edge and looked at the same path and knew that story was a lie. The geography didn't allow for accidents. This was a place you chose. Mont drove back to Green River and reported what he'd found to his chief at the police department. The response was immediate and final. The case belongs to the county. You said your piece. Move on. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department had jurisdiction over Lost Dog Trail. They'd taken Bob Duke's statement, closed the file, and called it accidental death. And here's what they didn't do. They didn't request search warrants for the Duke home. They didn't interview friends, neighbors, or anyone who knew the family. They didn't order a forensic autopsy of the bodies to check for injuries that didn't match a fall. The case was closed. Mont Meekum had every reason to believe Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke were murdered. He had the geography. He had Bob's impossible story about hearing his son from that distance but not finding the path down. He had a husband who showed no grief, and a new girlfriend 1 month later. What he didn't have was authority. In Sweetwater County in 1996, having reason and having authority were not the same thing. The county sheriff had made a decision. Green River Police had no jurisdiction to overturn it. Mont could say his piece, and he did. But saying it didn't change the file sitting closed in a drawer somewhere. Stamped accidental death. End of story. Except it wasn't the end. Because while official channels were closing, unofficial ones were just beginning to open. In a town of 11,000 people, information doesn't need warrants to spread. And the question Mont Mecham couldn't answer with a badge. Other people were starting to ask without one. The neighbor heard them fighting through the walls. She lived close enough to the Dukes that sound carried voices raised, doors slamming. The kind of arguments that make you turn the television up to drown them out. She would hear Bob screaming obscenities at Leanna and calling her vile names. Not just once, regularly. In Green River, when a story moves faster than paperwork, it means people are trying to tell you something. The bathroom story spread. A woman, someone's friend. Someone's sister. Someone who'd been at the Wild Horse Saloon that night heard Leanna Duke say Bob wanted out of the marriage, and that he'd told her that he'd kill her. That conversation happened. People remembered it now. Someone else saw Bob Duke at the gas station 1 month after burying his wife and son. He had a new girlfriend. Both of them were smiling. There were stories that Bob cheated on Leanna and that Leanna knew about it. There were whispers about fights, about fear, about a marriage that looked fine from a distance but fell apart up close. Everyone in Green River knew Bob and Leanna's marriage was violent. Everyone knew she'd feared for her life. Everyone knew he'd moved on impossibly fast. The people of Green River who watched, whispered, and remembered. They knew. But knowing and proving are not the same thing. And here's the detail that mattered most. Anyone who knew Leanna said the same thing. She was very protective of Eric. She didn't take her eyes off that boy. At playgrounds. At home. At the grocery store, she hovered close, kept him within arm's reach. The kind of mother people sometimes whispered about for being too protective. Bob's story required them to believe that at a cliff edge 180 feet high, on a remote trail at the end of a dirt road, she'd turned away. That, for the first time in Eric's 5 years of life, she'd stopped watching. The gap between what Green River knew and what a closed file could prove was a distance measured not in miles but in jurisdiction. Mont Mecham knew. The neighbor knew. The people who'd heard Leanna's warning in the bathroom knew. But the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department had decided, and no amount of whispered certainty could reopen a case stamped accidental death. Bob Clevenger drove Bob Duke home from Lost Dog Trail on the afternoon of August 10, 1996. The ride was quiet. He tried to make small talk. Tried not to say anything that would upset the man beside him who'd just lost his wife and son. I did not want to say anything that would upset him. Clevenger would recall later, when we got to his parents' house, all I said was, "Your son needs you now." Years later, after everything that came next, Clevenger would describe that drive in one sentence. I was riding back with a murderer and didn't know it. But by then, Bob Duke was already gone. Because $60,000 was a lot of money in Wyoming in 1996. And Bob Duke had places to be. Bob Duke collected $60,000 in life insurance 2 years after Leanna and Eric died. $60,000. The price the insurance company put on a wife and a 5-year-old son. The money came through without questions, without delays, without anyone asking why a protective mother would have turned away at the edge of a cliff, or how Bob Duke knew to drive to a remote trail he claimed never to have seen before. He packed what he wanted and left the rest. Mike Duke, his older brother, was living in Houston. Bob called and said he needed a place to stay. Mike said yes, and Bob Duke left Green River, Wyoming behind. In a town of 11,000 people, When someone leaves, the story leaves with them. Mont Macomb watched him go. Knew what he knew. Could do nothing with it. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department had jurisdiction, and they'd closed the file. Accidental death. Tragic fall. No search warrants. No interviews. No forensic autopsy. Bob Duke had told his story once, and it was enough. The case wasn't cold because evidence had disappeared. It was cold because everyone with the authority to warm it back up had decided it was warm enough already. Green River remembered. The neighbor who'd heard Bob screaming obscenities through the walls remembered. The people who'd seen him with a new girlfriend 1 month after the funerals remembered. The woman in the Wild Horse Saloon bathroom who'd heard Leanna say Bob told her he'd kill her wherever she was. She remembered too. But memory isn't evidence. And jurisdiction isn't justice. Bob Duke moved into Mike's place in Houston and started over. New city, new life. No one in Texas knew about Lost Dog Trail, or Leanna, or Eric, or the...
Eric did not. She was very protective of him.
In Houston, he was just another person trying to make it work. The $60,000 bought him time, bought him distance, bought him a life where people didn't whisper when he walked into a room. Back in Green River, the case file sat in a drawer somewhere stamped closed. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department wasn't looking for new evidence because they'd decided there was no crime to investigate. Mont Macomb still drove past Lost Dog Trail sometimes and stood at the edge and looked down at the 180-foot drop and thought about geography and what it proves when a story doesn't fit the shape of the land. But thinking isn't the same as doing. And the case wasn't his to investigate. The case wasn't cold. It was closed. Those are different things. $60,000 was a lot of money in Wyoming in 1996. Bob Duke spent it on living, on starting over, on forgetting. But money is only a lot of money for as long as it lasts. And it doesn't last forever. 2 years later, the phone on Mont Macomb's desk would ring, and the voice on the other end would say things that changed everything. The phone rang on Mont Macomb's desk 2 years after Bob Duke left Green River. He picked it up without thinking. A man's voice came through the line, strained, careful, like someone forcing themselves to speak before they could change their mind. "This is Roger, Bob Duke's friend." Mont didn't say anything. He knew who Roger was. Everyone in Green River knew Roger. "I need to tell you something," Roger said. His voice cracked. "About Leanna and Eric." Mont Macomb's hand tightened on the receiver. Roger started talking. Weeks before Leanna and Eric died, weeks, not days, Bob Duke approached him with a proposition. $20,000. Roger was supposed to kill Leanna and Eric and make it look like a botched burglary. Break in while Bob was at work. Stage it like a robbery gone wrong. Bob would collect the insurance, and Roger would get paid. Roger said no. Bob told him he was just venting. Didn't mean it. Just frustrated with the marriage, talking through his anger, nothing serious. Roger wanted to believe that. So he did. Then, on August 10th, 1996, Leanna and Eric Duke fell to their deaths at Lost Dog Trail. Bob Duke called it an accident. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department agreed. Roger felt sick, but he believed the story because Bob had told him it was an accident, and what else was he supposed to think? For 2 years, Roger carried that weight. The offer Bob had made, the refusal Roger had given, the deaths that came anyway. He told himself Bob couldn't have meant it, that the fall really was an accident, that the timing was just coincidence. How long can a person know something and choose not to see it? How many coincidences does it take before the shape of the truth becomes impossible to ignore? Roger told Mont Macomb he'd been choosing not to see it for 2 years. Then the week before, Bob Duke called him again. Same tone. Same casual approach. Would Roger be interested in another job? Same deal as before. $20,000, stage it right, make it look like something it wasn't. Bob said the money would be good. Said it would be easy. Different targets this time. That's when Roger knew. Not suspected, not wondered. Knew. Bob Duke hadn't been venting before. He'd been planning. And when Roger said no, Bob had gone to Lost Dog Trail and done it himself. Now he was planning to do it again. Who? Mont asked. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. Roger's voice barely made it through the line. Bob Duke had killed his wife and 5-year-old son for insurance money. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department had closed the file and called it an accident. Bob had walked away with $60,000 and started over in Houston. And for 2 years, no one with a badge had the jurisdiction or the will to prove otherwise. But now, Bob Duke was planning another murder. And this time, Roger was calling before it happened. Because the week before, Bob Duke called him. This time, not about Leanna. Mont Meekum's hand was already reaching for the phone before Roger finished talking. His own parents. Bob Duke wanted to kill his own parents. Mont dialed the FBI field office. "I need to speak to someone about interstate conspiracy to commit murder," he said. The call came from Texas. That makes it federal, doesn't it? It did. Bob Duke had called Roger from Houston. Interstate wire communication used to solicit murder gave the FBI jurisdiction under federal statute. The case Sweetwater County had closed was suddenly federal. Roger told Mont the rest while they waited. Bob's plan was identical to before $60,000. The same amount he'd collected when Leanna and Eric died. This time, the targets were his own parents. Stage it like an accident or burglary. Bob would split the insurance with his brother Mike, both sons planning to kill their own parents for money. Before we reveal how the FBI finally caught Bob Duke, comment A if you think he'll confess on tape, or B if he'll deny everything. Add one reason in 5 to 10 words so we can see how you're reading this. Please note what follows includes recreated details for narrative purposes. Agent Todd Scott arrived within hours. He was the federal investigator assigned the moment interstate wire fraud entered the picture. He sat across from Mont and Roger and listened to the whole story. The offer Bob made before Leanna and Eric died. The deaths at Lost Dog Trail. The closed file. And now this, another murder plot. Interstate wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit murder, Todd said. That's ours now. He looked at Roger. Both brothers, their own parents. Roger nodded. Mike Duke was in on it. How many murders does it take before someone with a badge is allowed to act? Bob Duke had killed his wife and 5-year-old son in 1996. The county sheriff called it an accident. Now he was planning to do it again. And federal law finally gave someone authority to stop him. But authority and evidence are different things. Todd asked the question that mattered. What's your record, Roger? Roger had a record. Everyone in Green River knew that. Roger's testimony was compelling. Bob had solicited murder for hire twice, but a jury wouldn't just hear his words. They'd hear about his criminal history, his friendship with Bob Duke, his questionable past. Roger's word was the word of a small-town hood with a record. "We need him to say it," Todd said. "On tape." They needed Bob Duke's voice confessing to the plot. Not Roger's memory, not Mont's certainty. Bob's actual voice. Recorded. Undeniable. Saying he wanted his parents dead for insurance money. Roger could testify about what Bob asked him to do. But they needed to hear Bob say it. The tape was already rolling when Roger dialed. FBI recording room. Equipment running. reels turning, capturing everything. Todd Scott and Mont Meekum sat with headphones on, listening. Roger held the phone in his hand, knuckles white where he gripped the receiver. He dialed Bob Duke's number in Houston. 3 rings. Then Bob's voice came through, casual, friendly, like he was expecting a call from an old friend. "Hey, it's me," Roger said. His voice shook slightly. "About that thing you mentioned." "Yeah." Bob sounded interested. "You in?" "Maybe. Tell me more." Bob Duke laid it out like he was describing a home repair project. Use a .22 caliber for quiet. Wait until both parents are together. Don't do them separately. That's sloppy. His father doesn't keep a gun in the house anymore, so there's no danger. Stage it right. Make it look like something it isn't. Then Bob said the part that would stick with Mont Meekum for years. "Take whatever you want from the house. Anything. But leave my dad's watch." Bob Duke was planning his inheritance from people who were still alive, deciding what Roger could steal and what belonged to him after his parents were murdered. The watch mattered to him, his father's watch, which would be his once his father was dead. Evil isn't always loud or frantic. Sometimes it's calm, methodical, negating payment like a business deal. Deciding which family heirlooms to keep before the bodies are even cold. Roger asked about money. "20's not enough," Bob said. "Let's make it 25. Insurance should cover it." $25,000. 5,000 more than he'd offered before Leanna and Eric died. Inflation, maybe. Or just Bob Duke deciding his parents' lives were worth a little extra. "When?" Roger asked. "Soon. ASAP. As soon as possible." Bob Duke wanted his parents dead as soon as possible. The call lasted another minute. Details about timing, logistics, the kind of planning that goes into murder when you've done it before and know what works. Then Bob said he had to go and the line went dead. Todd Scott stopped the recording. "We have him," he said. They had Bob Duke on federal tape planning interstate murder for hire, conspiracy to commit murder, interstate wire fraud. Enough to arrest him, charge him, put him away for conspiracy before he could kill his parents. Mont Meekum sat in that recording room and listened to Bob Duke calmly plan to murder the people who raised him. And he knew they finally had what they needed. But 2 names hadn't been mentioned on that tape. Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke. Bob had confessed to planning his parents' murders. He'd said nothing about the cliff, nothing about Lost Dog Trail, nothing about the wife and 5-year-old son who died in 1996. They could arrest Bob Duke for conspiracy. They could stop the next murders. But proving the first ones would require something else. Todd Scott told Roger to sit back down. The arrest warrant for conspiracy to commit murder was already signed. They had Bob Duke on federal tape planning to kill his parents for insurance money. They could take him down the next day, charge him, put him away for conspiracy before he could act on the plan. But Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke weren't in that warrant. "We need one more call," Todd said. Roger looked up. His hands were shaking. "The warrant is signed," Todd continued. "We can take him down tomorrow for his parents, but Leanna and Eric aren't in it." Mont Meekum sat across the table in the FBI recording room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and institutional. Roger had just done what they'd asked, called Bob Duke. Got him talking about murder. Recorded the whole thing. Now they were asking for more. "Bring up the cliff," Todd said. "Lost Dog Trail, his wife and kid. Get him talking about what happened that day." Roger's voice was barely audible. "What if he knows? What if he suspects something?" Todd's response was cold and immediate. "Then you deal with it. That's what you signed up for." This wasn't Mont Meekum giving him space to think it over. This wasn't Green River Police asking nicely. This was federal law enforcement, and they weren't asking. "We're not asking, Roger," Todd said, confirming it. Roger looked at Mont. Mont had known him since high school, had watched him make bad choices and worse friends, had seen him become the kind of person people crossed the street to avoid. But Mont had also listened when Roger called with the truth about Bob Duke. And that call had started all of this. The dead cannot speak for themselves. Someone living has to say their names, carry their story, demand their justice. Mont spoke quieter than Todd, but with weight that came from 2 years of carrying a case he couldn't touch. "She tried to warn someone," Mont said. No one believed her. Roger knew who he meant. Leanna Duke in the Wild Horse Saloon bathroom, telling a stranger Bob said he'd kill her. The woman who'd dismissed it with a platitude and forgotten about it before the night was over. "You're the only chance they have to be part of this," Mont said. Leanna Davidson Duke, 22 years old, who tried to warn someone and wasn't believed until 6 years too late. Eric Duke, 5 years old, whose mother never took her eyes off him until the day Bob Duke said the ground gave way. Roger sat in that sterile FBI recording room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and his hands gripping the arms of the chair to keep them from shaking. And he understood what they were asking. One more call. One more wire. This time, bring up the cliff. Bring up Leanna and Eric. Get Bob Duke talking about the murders he'd gotten away with for 2 years. Todd looked at Roger. "Say their names," he said. Roger's voice broke when he spoke. "Leanna Davidson Duke," he said. Then, "Eric Duke." Todd nodded. "Now make Bob say them too." The phone rang 3 times before Bob Duke picked up. FBI recording room. Equipment running. Todd Scott and Mont Meekum listening through headphones. Roger held the phone with both hands this time, steadying himself. Bob's voice came through casual and friendly. "Hey man, what's up?" Roger forced his voice steady. "Still thinking about that thing?" "Yeah," Bob said. "Soon. Maybe when their policy renews." His parents' life insurance policy. Bob Duke was planning his parents' murders around their insurance renewal date like it was a business transaction. Roger asked about timing, about details. The kind of small talk that keeps a conversation moving forward without saying what it's really about. Then Roger asked the question. His voice shook slightly when he said it, but he got the words out. "Can you make it look like an accident, you know? Like you did with your wife and kid?" Direct. No ambiguity. Roger had just accused Bob Duke of murdering Leanna and Eric. And the line went quiet. Mont Meekum sat in the FBI recording room listening to silence through headphones, waiting for Bob Duke's response. And everything in that moment was suspended. The reels turning, Roger's breathing, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Bob's response came quick, flat. No hesitation. "Dude, I did not do that." 7 words. But the 4 that mattered were in the middle. "I did not." Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "How could you say that?" Not, "Are you serious right now?" Just denial. Calm, matter of fact, like Roger had asked if Bob wanted coffee and he'd said no thanks. What does guilt sound like? Sometimes it's not confession, it's denial without shock, refusal without rage. It's the absence of the question an innocent person would ask first. "What do you mean?" Bob Duke didn't ask what Roger meant. He didn't demand an explanation. He heard the accusation that he'd murdered his wife and 5-year-old son, and he responded like someone declining an offer, not like someone being accused of the worst thing a person can do. He didn't ask what Roger meant, Mont would say later. Todd Scott heard it too. Bob Duke's calm denial, without confusion, without outrage, without the shock that comes from being wrongly accused. The call lasted another minute, and then Bob said he had to go. They arrested Bob Duke hours after that call ended. Conspiracy to commit murder, interstate wire fraud. The federal charges came first. The plot to kill his parents was the crime they could prove with tape. But Mont Meekum sat in that recording room and listened to Bob Duke deny killing Leanna and Eric. And the denial told him everything confession would have. Bob knew exactly what Roger meant. He just said no. Todd Scott had to drive to Wyoming after the arrest. Someone needed to tell Bob Duke's parents their son was sitting in a federal holding cell, arrested for conspiracy to murder them for insurance money. Two people who didn't know yet that their son had planned to kill them. Two people who would have to hear it from a federal agent they'd never met. Bob Duke's last free phone call was a denial. And the denial was all the proof Mont Meekum needed. Todd Scott sat in the Duke family living room with a tape recorder on the coffee table between them. Larry and Bobby Duke sat across from him. They were Bob and Mike's parents, the people their sons had plotted to kill for insurance money. Family photos lined the walls, graduations, holidays, the kind of pictures every parent keeps. Todd's voice was careful and quiet when he spoke. "Your sons were arrested yesterday for conspiracy to commit murder," he said. "They planned to kill you, both of you, for the insurance." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when words don't make sense. When what's being said is so far outside possibility that the mind rejects it outright. Larry spoke first. "That can't be right. Not our boys." Bobby Duke shook her head. "There has to be some mistake. No one wants to believe their child is capable of planning their death. No one wants to hear that the people they raised and loved and sacrificed for sat in another state and discussed how to kill them for money." But Todd Scott had driven to Wyoming to tell them because someone had to. And it had to be said plainly. "I have recordings," Todd said. He gestured to the tape recorder on the table. "You can hear Bob's voice, his plan, how he wanted it done, when, how much he was willing to pay." Larry and Bobby Duke looked at the tape recorder like it was something dangerous. "We don't need to hear that," Bobby said. "We're not going to listen to those," Larry added. How much can a parent refuse to see when seeing means accepting their child as a killer? When listening means hearing your son discuss your death like a business transaction? When the truth, sitting on a coffee table in a black case, would break something that can't be unbroken? Todd didn't push. He sat there with the tape recorder between them. Bob Duke's voice captured on federal recording equipment, planning his parents' murders in methodical detail, and he didn't argue. "They're our sons," Larry Duke said. "We'll stand by them." Todd Scott nodded. "I understand." He put the tape recorder back in his case and stood. He'd done what he came to do. He'd told them the truth. That they chose not to hear it was their right. He left the Duke home knowing it was the hardest thing he'd done as a federal agent. Bob Duke pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Federal court. Federal prison. Federal sentence. 10 years. His brother Mike Duke pleaded guilty as well and got 21 months for his role in the plot. But no charges were filed for what happened at Lost Dog Trail. No charges for Leanna Davidson Duke, 22 years old, who tried to warn someone in a bathroom and wasn't believed. No charges for Eric Duke, 5 years old, whose mother never took her eyes off him until the day Bob Duke said the ground gave way. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department had closed that case in 1996 as accidental death. Bob Duke went to federal prison for conspiracy to murder his parents. But Leanna and Eric still had no justice. The Cliff deaths remained officially an accident. 2 years after Bob Duke's conviction for conspiracy to commit murder, Harold sits in his office in Wyoming. Examining photographs from August 1996. Crime scene photos from Lost Dog Trail. Leanna Davidson Duke, Eric Duke. The cliff where they fell. Harold is the prosecutor assigned to determine whether Bob Duke can be charged with murder for deaths ruled accidental 6 years ago. He has Mont Meekum's investigation. He has the geography. He has Bob's lie about never being out there. But he does not have physical evidence. He studies the photographs under lamplight, one by one. Leanna's body at the base of the cliff. Eric beside her. The rescue team's documentation. The coroner's report, blunt force trauma, accidental fall. The August heat. The remoteness of the trail. Then Harold sees it. A mark on Leanna's neck in one photograph. Faint, barely visible in the shadows and bruising. But there. He sends the photograph to a forensic pathologist with a single question. Can you determine cause of death from this mark? The pathologist's reply arrives 3 days later. 3 words. Dig him up. July 2000. 4 years after Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke were buried in Green River, Wyoming, their graves are opened. The exhumation order is signed. The bodies are carefully removed from the earth and transported for forensic examination. Harold waits. The forensic pathologist examines the remains for evidence of manual strangulation. The hyoid bone, a small, horseshoe-shaped bone in the neck that fractures when someone is strangled, will answer the question the photograph cannot. 4 days later, the results arrive. The hyoid bone is intact, no fracture. No evidence of manual strangulation. The mark on Leanna's neck in the photograph was bruising from the fall. Or shadow, or decomposition, not strangulation. The dead cannot answer questions. But sometimes we ask them anyway, hoping their bones will speak louder than their silence. Leanna and Eric are reburied. The exhumation yields nothing. The hope that rose with those opened graves dies with the forensic report. Harold closes the file. No physical evidence of murder, no confession, no eyewitnesses to what happened on Lost Dog Trail on August 10, 1996. No forensic proof that Leanna and Eric were killed rather than falling accidentally. But he has the cliff itself. Mont Meekum's 1998 investigation proved Bob Duke lied. Bob claimed he had never been to Lost Dog Trail, did not know where it was, could not have gone there. But the geography of the trail, the remoteness, the specific turnoff, the parking area, the cliff's edge made that impossible. Bob described details only someone who had been there would know. The cliff is the evidence. The geography is the witness. The trail itself testifies. Harold indicts Bob Duke for first-degree murder of Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke. No physical evidence, no forensics, no confession. Only the cliff itself, the geography that proves Bob lied. They are going to trial with nothing but a map and Mont Meekum's memory. Harold was eating a hurried sandwich in his office when someone knocked on the door mid-trial. The trial had opened with Mont Meekum walking the jury through Lost Dog Trail's geography. Maps. Measurements. The impossibility of Bob Duke's story. A young woman stood in the doorway, maybe 21, nervous. "I need to testify," she said. "I know something about Bob Duke." Harold set down his sandwich. "He took me to Lost Dog Trail multiple times. In 1994, the courtroom murmured when she took the witness stand. Her voice was steady, certain. She was 13 years old in 1994. Bob Duke took her to Lost Dog Trail. Not once, multiple times. He said he was married in name only, she testified. He was looking for a way out, without child support. 2 years before Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke fell from that cliff, Bob Duke drove a 13-year-old girl to the same remote trail. He showed her the turnoff. the parking area, the cliff's edge. "We went to Lost Dog Trail," she said. More than once. The jury watched her, faces weighing every word. Bob Duke's entire defense rested on one claim: he had never been to Lost Dog Trail before August 10, 1996. He did not know where it was. Could not have planned what happened there. The witness remembered the way, because he showed her. Sometimes, the smallest voice in the room carries the heaviest truth. A 13-year-old girl who remembered what a grown man tried to forget. Her testimony destroyed his defense in minutes. He claimed ignorance. She testified to knowledge. He said he'd never been there. She said he took her there repeatedly 2 years before his wife and son died on that same cliff. Memory outlasts lies. The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman stood. Guilty. First-degree murder. Leanna Davidson Duke. Guilty. First-degree murder. Eric Duke. Guilty. September 2002. Bob Duke was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences for murdering his 22-year-old wife and 5-year-old son. He sat motionless as the sentence was read. 6 life sentences. No possibility of parole. But here is the truth no one said aloud in that courtroom. Bob Duke almost got away with it. The trail went cold in 1996. The deaths were ruled accidental. Leanna and Eric were buried. The insurance paid out. Bob moved on. He might have disappeared into quiet freedom, his crime buried with them. Except Bob wanted more money. He recruited his parents to help him murder Roger for another insurance payout. That greed brought federal investigators. The wiretaps. The conspiracy conviction. The scrutiny that finally forced someone to look back at 1996. Montmecum looked. Montmecum found the geography. The geography exposed the lie. The lie brought the trial. The trial brought the witness. The witness brought the truth. Bob Duke almost got away with murdering his wife and 5-year-old son. The only thing that stopped him was wanting more money. Leanna Davidson Duke was 22 years old when she died, and she tried to warn someone. 6 years passed between the Wild Horse Saloon bathroom and the guilty verdict. Bob Duke sits in a Wyoming state prison now, serving 6 consecutive life sentences. Wild Horse Saloon, Green River, 1996. Leanna told someone she was afraid, that her husband was going to kill her. No one believed her. 6 years later, a jury heard the evidence and believed her. By then, Leanna had been dead for 2,190 days. Eric Duke would be 35 years old now. He was 5 when he died on Lost Dog Trail. Bob Duke exhausted all his appeals. The conviction stands. 6 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. No one knows what happened at the cliff edge. Bob never confessed. He maintains his innocence. The only version he offers is the one from August 1996. They were walking. Leanna stepped too close. She fell. Eric ran after her. The geography proved that impossible. Montmecum's investigation showed Bob lied about never knowing the trail. A young woman's testimony proved Bob took her there 2 years before Leanna and Eric died. But what happened in those final moments? The mark on Leanna's neck was never explained. The exhumation in 2000 found her hyoid bone intact, no strangulation. But the photograph showed something. Bruising. Shadow. The question the dead cannot answer. True crime isn't about the killer. It's about remembering the people who don't get to tell their own stories anymore. Larry Duke and Bobby Duke still believe their son is innocent. They refuse to hear the wiretap recordings in 1998. They refuse to believe the evidence now.
He heard Leanna let out a scream. and that Eric had fallen and she went after him.
He left that world behind. Small redemptions exist, even in the darkest cases. Green River, Wyoming, is 11,000 people who remember. The Wild Horse Saloon where Leanna tried to warn someone. The cemetery where she and Eric were buried. Exhumed. Then buried again. The courthouse where justice arrived 6 years too late. Lost Dog Trail still climbs into the Wind River Range. The remoteness that made Bob Duke think he could get away with murder. The story ends where his lie broke. Bob Duke said he had never been to Lost Dog Trail before August 10, 1996. That he did not know where it was. But a young woman walked into a courtroom in September 2002 and remembered differently. She remembered because 2 years before Bob Duke killed his wife and 5-year-old son on that trail. He took her there and showed her the way. He said he'd never been out there. She remembered the way. Leanna Davidson Duke.
You don't take your small child and your wife and go have a picnic on a rock ledge on 3 sides.
Duke was 22 years old when she died. Eric Duke was 5. This case reminds us that warnings matter, and so does believing them. Leanna tried to tell someone. She spoke her fear aloud in that bathroom at the Wild Horse Saloon, but her warning wasn't heard until 6 years too late. After a jury listened to the geography of a cliff, the testimony of a young woman who remembered, and the evidence that greed ultimately revealed. The lesson isn't complicated. Memory outlasts lies. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when it takes years. Even when it requires courage from unexpected witnesses. Even when justice arrives too late to save the people who needed it most. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like Leanna's reach the people who need to hear them. Drop a comment below. What stood out to you most? Was it the ignored warning, the geographic proof, or the witness who finally spoke up? I read every comment.
The sheriff said, hey, it's an accident, let it go.
Respect and care. This story is based on a real case, with some scenes dramatized to convey the full impact of what happened. The facts, the names, the dates, the outcome, are drawn from documented events. My deepest respect goes to the family of Leanna Davidson Duke and Eric Duke, and to everyone affected by this tragedy.
Hey, remember when we talked before about the $20,000 for killing your parents? Okay.
Gotta be together.